All right. Thanks very much. Thanks for the team. Thanks to Eric and Zach and Charlie and the whole Spine Summit group. This has been amazing. I think you've done an incredible job. Excited to be here. My name is Adam Kanter. I am the Chief of Neurosurgery and the newly appointed Executive Medical Director at the Hoag Hospital in Newport Beach, California. And typically, these are my disclosures here. Everybody knows me from being at the University of Virginia. That's where I trained, and then spent a year with Praveen at UCSF doing my fellowship, and then 15 years at UPMC as the Chief of Spine. And that's what I'm known for. This was why I've been talking to folks for the last 20 years, and this is usually what I'm talking about minimally invasive surgery, large surgeries through small portals, deformity correction. So I'm kind of entering a new stage in life, and what kind of prompted this for me was the COVID break. It allowed me to take pause for a minute and really consider what it is that I've been doing, what my passions are, and what my challenges are, and if I felt like I was still being challenged. And I felt like at that point I was kind of on autopilot. In my professional career, I felt a bit stagnant. I had all these titles, but not really sure I had much of a true voice. And it enabled me to kind of get myself together, really think about where it is that I wanted to go for the next chapter, if I wanted to stay on auto drive or do something new. And I decided to picked up my family and my career, my practice, and we went to Hoag Hospital out in Newport Beach, California, which incidentally is where my wife actually grew up, in Irvine, California. So there were multiple forces. But new challenges, and I had new energy. Took the leap of faith. Joe Maroon, who was one of my mentors back in Pitt, always told me that every time he started a new job, he felt a new energy, newly reinvigorated. This is something that I was looking for as well. But I had some gaps. As I said, I was coming to not only take over the Chief of Neurosurgery, but I was coming to fulfill an administrative role as the Executive Medical Director of the Neurosciences Institute. So I wanted to fill that gap, and I decided to go back to school, get my MBA. So I started at UCLA, Anderson School of Management, and this is my cohort. And at 50 years old, I was a student again. It had been quite a while, but I surrounded myself. We all surround ourselves. We're honestly, we are each other's cohort, right? We spend most of our time together with our medical community. And this was the first time in a long time that I was surrounding myself with folks that were in totally different fields. So I was getting completely different perspectives from folks that were in Google, Disney, SpaceX, Microsoft, the armed forces. I was working with an entirely different cohort of individuals. And I was exposed to what I feel was true diversity. I know we talk about gender and race, and certainly important. But the diversity I was being exposed to was diversity in where people were coming from, in their trade, their experience, their perspective, their thinking, the way they problem solve, their group thought, the creative way that they got together. Everything, when you get your MBA, everything you do, you're doing it with 5 or 6 other people. You don't get to do anything on your own. And that's part of the process, is learning that sometimes you're going to have really difficult folks you're working with, or difficult situations, people that you would never think that you'd pair up with well. And you'll be very, very surprised of the ideas that come together and how creative you become because of those additional perspectives and ideas coming to the table. But what's also very clear is that anytime you're considering evolving your career, you need to further educate yourself. And this was brought to light. My son, we heard a lot about Nick Saban. My son actually chose his college because he wanted to go work with Nick Saban. So he went to the University of Alabama. He graduated in 2022 with a degree in sports and news broadcasting. And I introduced him to Jeff Morad, who was the owner and CEO of the San Diego Padres. And I thought, great, this is your connection, this is your hookup. And you know what he said to my son? He said, you know what separates all the folks, all their resumes on my desk, is their education, their investment in themselves, their willingness to go learn the language, the words, and to really build their toolbox. And I took that to heart and decided to build my toolbox in management, finance, operations, organizational behavior, to build my leadership skills so that they could become habits, and to bridge that gap between my clinical skill set and those that would be required for me to excel in healthcare management. So 2-year MBA, that should do the trick, right? I'm not sure how many folks feel that after our 4 years in medical school, you felt like we were doctors, but did you really feel like you were a doctor at that point? No, we had the foundation, we had the base knowledge, we had the language, but it takes experience. It's wisdom, as Eric pointed out. It takes time for us to develop and really become doctors. And the same is true. Now I'm going to have an MBA in June. I'm not a business person, but I have the language, and I can now sit at the table. And that's a big part is just getting your seat at the table. Everybody knows who Amelia Earhart is, right? The first woman to fly transatlantic solo. But do you know what the conditions were when she was actually offered that opportunity? Amelia Earhart was offered the opportunity. She probably died, is what she was told. She wasn't going to get paid, and she was going to do it with 2 male pilots who are actually going to be the ones that were going to fly the plane, and she got to come along. And she said, no, that sounds fantastic. I'll take that job. 5 years later, she ended up doing it herself, right? Because she just needed the seat at the table, following which she would then get working. And she imprinted on the side of her airplane, always think with your stick forward. Get the seat at the table, start working forward. And that's exactly what Amelia Earhart do. And the same is true of us, of physicians, of surgeons in the boardroom, getting a seat at the table. Conditions may not be ideal, but say yes, get to the table, and start helping to make those decisions, because we need to be there in order to direct the future of healthcare. Once you get to that table, it's then very important to be able to distinguish between what you have control of and what you don't have control of. You want to make sure that you're working with the things that you do have control of, because some things are out of your control. We're all familiar with Tommy John, right? Through the Tommy John surgery, when the UCL, Uncanny Collateral Ligament or something, becomes injured, that's called a dead arm in baseball, and usually that was the end of your career. Tommy John started playing baseball in 1963. He had a 26-year career, 26 years of playing professional sports at the highest level. 11 years in, he tore his UCL. That was the end, right? It was not, because the one thing he had control of was, is there anything that I can do? Is there anything possible that I can do to get back on that mound? They said, well, there's this experimental surgery. At that point, it wasn't yet the Tommy John surgery, but they said, there's something we can try. There's something experimental here. He said, let's do it. And then he can control his work ethic afterward. And he worked day in and day out, and he won another 164 games after that for another 15 years. In fact, he actually got cut by the Yankees in 1988 and said, if I try out at spring training and I make the team, would you allow that? And they said, well, you're not going to, but sure. He actually came back, not only made the team after spending the offseason working as hard as he could, but he opened, he was there for the season opener, pitched 7 innings and gave up 2 runs. So just an incredible story. And this guy, 1963 to 1989, he pitched against Mickey Mantle and Mark McGwire. That's the extent of his focus on the things that you can. Focus on the things that you can affect, where you can affect change. Do that in the operating room. We're all very familiar with that. You also have to do that in the boardroom. When you get to the boardroom, figure out, what is it that we're doing here? What is it that where I can affect change? Things that I can control. And that's what we need to focus on. What about the things that you can't control? We have to learn how to domesticate our emotions. Our reactions, right? That's the emotional baggage that we have left over from our amygdala, where back in the old days, saber-toothed tiger would come on and we'd have to react, right? Just like a deer, you get spooked and then it runs, and it doesn't usually run into good spots. Sometimes it runs right into cars, right? We need to domesticate our emotions, act to modern-day problems with modern-day thinking. Our emotions cause us to react instinctively, to make mistakes, deviate from our plans, to skip rules. My CEO, Robert Braithwaite, I call him the great marinator, because no matter what project, no matter what issue or challenge I go to him with, he says, let me think on that. He never makes emotional reactive decisions. He sees challenges rationally, and then he sees those solutions clearly, and he focuses on the problem instead of reacting to it. And he gave me a hint and said, when you have problems, when you're trying to solve a difficult problem, treat it as if it's someone else's problem. Because if you can drop that emotional baggage and how you're feeling about it, it's going to be a lot easier for you to solve that problem. Very true. Focus on your desired outcome. 2 major companies, actually one was a major, United Fruit Company versus this very, very small company called Cayumel, owned by a small business owner, Sam Zumari. And they both wanted to buy land, 5,000 acres of land in between Honduras and Guatemala. And United Fruit said, well, we're going to get that land. We got all the best lawyers. They were figuring out who is the rightful owner to that land so that we can then go ahead and buy that land and have that 5,000 acres and continue with our monopoly here. Joe decided, he met with both of the owners, right? Because there were owners on the, not owners, but there were folks on the side of Guatemala and folks on the side of Honduras that both said that they own the land. So he met with both of them and then bought it from both of them. Because he realized that what's not important is who owned the land yesterday. What's important is that I own that land today. So despite having 1/100th the amount of dollars to spend, he ended up owning the land and ultimately ended up being a significant owner in United Fruit shortly after. But the point is that identify barriers and make them irrelevant. That's what Sam did. And we can do that in hospitals as well. There's lots of ways, unique ways that we can say, these are the rules that exist. How do we work within them and create opportunities such as timeshares where non-proceduralists can come in and we can get folks working with us at their top of their game, but difficult environment for them to come in and work at. Identify your opportunities. We all know our assets and liabilities, what makes us money versus what loses money. The best doctors, the best technology, the most advanced instrumentation, that having fully staffed operating rooms, fully staffed hospitals. These are the things we want to invest in. And sometimes it's a fight. Sometimes it's difficult. There's antiquated equipment. There's doctors that have high reoperations and high readmissions, but they're also high volume. But is that really an asset or is that a liability? So you got to really determine what those are, differentiate between the two, and then invest in the assets. There was a strategist, historical strategist, Little Hart, that wrote a book. What he did is he looked at all of the past battles and wars, looked at 280 of them. Of those 280, he found that only 6 of them, 2%, were actually won by attacking the front line of their adversary. 2%. That the way to actually win battles is to find the weaknesses, to find the side entrances, the ways to be able to attack not at your opponent's or your adversary's strongest port, but where they're at their weakest. And that's what Phil Jackson used to do when he won his 6 championships with the Bulls, is he would run the triangle offense and keep running that triangle until a weakness developed, at which point they would then attack. Encourage collaboration. Atlassian is a Australian software company, and every quarter, so 3 times a year, they have all their engineers just drop everything that they're doing, and they have to spend the next 24 hours working with an entirely unique group. A group of, whether it's in the same area or whether it's a completely different area, but they can't continue working on what they're normally working on. They have to work with a new group, and that they call it FedEx Day because you got 24 hours to do it. But what that does is it creates an entirely different group. It develops camaraderie across their company, injects creativity into products, operations, and processes. And this is something that Google is well known for doing too, with their 20% rule, where 1 day a week, right now it's 20% for Google, they have to work on something that they feel would most benefit Google. So they drop what you're doing, don't work on what you're normally doing the other 4 days of the week, work with a different group of people, and in a way that's going to be best for Google. And half of their products are actually created during that 20% time. What products are coming to the market? They're MVP, they're minimal viable product. They're not putting their products, they're fully polished. They're bringing the basic version of their core ideas with a few features, see how the market responds, and then they embrace failure because that's where they get their feedback and they can make their iterative improvements. And this is where we heard a lot about failure today, where they develop that healthy relationship with failure. And it's important to fail quickly and fail cheaply. This is a little tidbit I learned when I was at UCLA what they did is they did all these beautiful, UCLA, if folks haven't been there, it's a gorgeous, incredible campus. So well manicured, but they're constantly having to remanicure because the students are traipsing all across the grass everywhere. So every week they're redoing it. That's as opposed to Stony Brook, where they put down really, really cheap grass, and then they watch where the students would sit, where the students would walk, and then they put their pathways, they actually put their capital where the students were showing that that's where they wanted to travel. So they have a beautiful campus, and they spend dramatically less on their manicuring. Perform a pre-mortem. We all know what a post-mortem is when we look after the fact, but what about making sure that you get together and you say, what could go wrong? Because failure is not bad. It's the unanticipated failure that is the problem. So be prepared for failure and ready for success. And we do this through strategic thinking. We study and understand the macro environment. We scrutinize policies. We look at the economics, adapt meaningful technologies and advancements, encourage group thinking, foster diversity in thought and ideas, incentivize teamwork and collaboration. And I'm going to make this super quick here. Well, I'm going to try. There was an earthquake 30 years ago in Southern California. And it basically, they lost the Santa Monica Highway, the way that Los Angeles actually get to and from Los Angeles. It's costing $1 million a day. They needed cost, quality, and time. They said it's going to take probably $100 million and minimum of $100 million and 3 to 5 years, potentially even up to 10 to fix this problem. This one guy, C.C. Myers, said, let's come up with what are the bottlenecks? What stops our ability to be able to do this in a more reasonable period of time, right? We're all familiar with bottlenecks, the cycle time, the amount of time that it takes for a process, plus the wait time. And the wait time is often what's worse. The wait time is usually the big problem. The wait time, PACU holds, anesthesia, turnover time, these are all things that we're familiar with, is that wait time. How do we get rid of that wait time? So C.C. Myers talked with everyone the day of the earthquake and said, I'll sign a letter of understanding with the mayor in 2 days. I'll do it in 5 months, under 5 months, 140 days. But for every day that I'm late after that, I'll give you $200,000 back. For every day early, if I finish it early, I want $200,000 for my team, for my group. But the most important thing is I want the state inspector on my team, and I want to be able to start Friday. And they agreed to it, and he did, because the mayor thought that's pretty much a win-win. And he realized that everybody's incentivized differently, money, reputation, time, purpose. But he spoke with everyone, made sure that everybody was on board for the reason that was important to them, and brought up quality, right? We all know Steve Jobs. You know, his dad was a cabinet maker, and he painted the back of all his cabinets and taught Steve that quality is through and through, from front to back, regardless if people can see it or not. That's why the inside of Steve's computers are just as beautiful as the outside. And he actually has all of his engineers digitally sign the inside of his computers because they're art. C.C. Myers knew that the one issue he was going to have is with regulatory things. So he said, I'm going to get the inspector in, because the pre-inspection, the inspection, the final inspection, he wants that all involved. He wanted to turn quality control into quality assurance. Quality control is when you find the defects afterwards, it's reactive. Quality assurance is you find them proactively and you address them, so it's preventive. He planted lights throughout the entire region so that he could work day and night, and they did. They had shifts, and 24 hours a day, they were working. Strategic partnerships, as I mentioned, he eliminated those largest bottlenecks, the wait time. He turned his adversaries into allies, brought them in from the very beginning so that he had their buy-in, or he had more than their buy-in, he had their built-in. And as Lincoln taught us, our greatest allies are not always obvious. You need to get them in on your side, because when they're invested in your success, you're far more likely to be successful. And he went and he proceeded and he built and completed the highway, and he did it in 66 days. 66 days. Could have been up to 5 to 10 years. He did it in 66 days, and he got a bonus of $14.8 million because he did it in 74 days early. So tips at the end of the day: value your communication, teamwork, and support to foster a motivated and invested health team. Invoke change and innovation through your influence. Inspire those around you. Reinforce a culture of excellence and continuous improvement. The future of healthcare is undoubtedly a blend of clinical as well as management and technological expertise. So become educated. Educate yourselves. Do whatever you can to increase your education. Invest in that. Continuous learning, that's the answer. Being adaptable in this ever-changing healthcare landscape. Look forward to seeing you all next year in Tampa. Thank you.